Hey everybody, CVH here, and in today's video I'll be breaking down my version of the Orc Warrior deck. So obviously orcs are the creature type that many people associate with the warrior class, thanks in part to Melton Chieftain, I guess. However, the popularity of the deck type isn't super high on the ladder. A lot of the times people will say the power level is relatively low. I've been playing a lot of mid-range warrior kind of recently on stream. Today I decided I would give the Orc Warrior deck a shot. I thought it might have some potential that I have yet to realize. I haven't really played this deck to any real extent before, and I was pleasantly surprised. So that's a little bit of backstory. I queued up on the ladder with the intent to just sort of kind of derp around and just see if I could get a few wins out of it and learn a bit about the deck. And we wound up getting what I would call sort of an extraordinary little win streak. As you can see, we're at legend number 5, so we streaked to top 5 on a 16-2 win rate, which is pretty unheard of for, you could be playing many tier 1 decks, and obviously part of it had to have been running hot, getting a little bit lucky, obviously, but I do think the deck is a serious contender and very powerful after playing with it today. So I thought I would do a video, deck tech, and sort of go over my specific card choices and how the deck works, essentially. So what we have is a aggressive mid-range deck, more so leaning towards the aggro than a lot of the different mid-range decks you might see. We're really being proactive with this deck, putting a bunch of early pressure on the board, and capitalizing on that with some threats in the sort of 5 to 7 drop turns, or 4 to 7 you could say, because Bankrai Butcher. But we'll get into the specific cards now, starting with Rapid Shot. I'm not super up to date with a bunch of the different orc variants in Warrior, but I don't know if Rapid Shot is considered staple, but I think it's very important because it deals with faster decks. This deck isn't the greatest at playing from behind, so it's critically important that it doesn't get behind against a deck like Aggro Battle Mage. Rapid Shot was pretty key when I was playing against the deck today, and I have to imagine against similarly paced decks like the Orc Warrior deck, it'll help you cycle, help you trade up, and just get rid of cards like Greystone Ravager that are, pretty common in aggro decks, and Relentless Raider, stuff like that. So then we have a lot of orcs on 2 Magicka. Obviously, like I said, we don't want to fall behind at all. Turns 1 through 4 are the really important turns for this deck, so we are going all in on 2 drops, basically. We have 3 Dragon Tail Saviors, 3 Firewound Defenders, 3 Greystone Ravagers, and 3 Orc Clan Captain. It's fun to note that the Defenders and the Ravagers are Prophecies as well, and getting these off of Prophecy can be just swingy enough in the early turns. Just that extra 2 Magicka of free value if you're up against a deck that's breaking your runes very, very quickly. That can turn the tides of a game. Obviously, Dragon Tail Savior is a very solid 2-drop, so we're playing it. These are all orcs, obviously. Orc Clan Captain can add a bunch of power to the board. It's not our ideal 2-drop on curve, but when you're just trying to get those extra pushes or extra, beneficial trades if you're fighting for the board early, this card is very, very valuable. And of course, to round things out, we have the 3 copies of Windkeep Spellsword, and the simple reason for that is that we are playing Endurance, so we're playing 3 copies of Windkeep Spellsword because it's that good. So moving on to the 3-drops, we have a bunch more orcs. We are really trying to maximize the value out of the orc synergy cards that we haven't gotten into yet. 3 Battle Rage orcs, pretty easy to, Battle Rage orc, Morkel Gatekeeper. You see these in a lot of aggressive red decks for good reason. The effects are just really good. 2/3 with charge. Prophecy, Guard, allows you to race your opponents, trade up, deal more damage. Really powerful card after they gave it Prophecy. 3 copies of Stone Shard Orc. Obviously, if you're playing an Orc deck, this is one of the cards you're going to be trying to get off the most in this deck. The power level of this card is extremely high. Many times throughout today's grind, in just the 18 games I played, I guess, it would frequently get to 3 and 4 damage pings with the Stone Shard Orc. Obviously, 2 was the most common. Occasionally, you'd only be dealing 1 damage, but that's very rare in this deck if you have a decent start at all. And obviously, like I said, it gets up to those 4 and 5 damage pings more often than you would think, and it can be pretty game breaking, the tempo swing that this little guy can give you. 3 Rothgar Artisans. So I'm not like, over the moon about this card. It's pretty reasonable. It's no Young Mammoth, but the reason I'm including this card over Young Mammoth is pretty obvious. It's simply that it's an orc. Obviously, it has some more versatility. You can choose where you get the +1/+1, but overall, we're losing 1 stat point in Breakthrough, and I think that's fine. I think that's fine because we're getting those additional procs out of the Stone Shard Orc, the additional value out of the Melton Chieftain, the additional procs out of the Wood Orc Headhunter, and the additional procs of the Bankrai Butcher. In order for this deck to be something you'd want to play over, say, the mid-range warrior deck that I've talked about and played a little bit on this channel and on my stream before. In order to really justify playing this deck, you really want to get the maximum value out of all these cards because these are the cards that are setting the deck apart. And while this deck plays very similarly, the tricks it can do with these orcs are very neat and require you to have as many orcs on board as possible. So yeah, that's basically it for Artisan. Pretty good card, not much to say about that. Bankai Butcher, this is really the heavy hitter of this deck. Dropping this on turn 3 with the Ring of Magicka after playing, ring out a 2-drop on turn 1, ring out a 3-drop on turn 2, ring out a Bankai Butcher. That's kind of the ideal situation. Obviously, playing it on 4 or even after is fine if you're able to get the +2/+2. I don't think throughout the day I ever had to summon it without it getting +2/+2. It's speaking good things about the idea of including cards like Artisan over potentially better cards like the Young Mammoth. Yeah, Bankai Butcher, when it comes down as a 6/5, obviously very hard to deal with. This deck is going to be putting control decks on the back foot because they'll typically have to use more than one card to deal with your one card per turn that you'll be playing out. That's very powerful, like most mid-range decks do. And that'll just keep your opponent behind the entire game. After it, hopefully pushing for 6 damage or however much your guys do. Earthbone Spinner, not much to say about this card. Incredibly powerful Silence. We're playing it over Shadowfen Priest. We don't really care about supports too much, even though we do have one other card in the deck that does destroy supports. Just playing this because occasionally it can actually kill things, so it's better against aggro decks. More reasonably statted because we don't have a ton of things on turn 4, but we do have some cards competing for turn 5. One more card for turn 4, though. This is sort of the flex spot. I didn't really know what to put here. I put in Lucian the Chance, and it's been pretty good. Occasionally, this deck can put out some, pretty powerfully statted dudes. Even early game, we have cards like Windkeep, Spellsword, and Battle Rage Orc, which frequently trade better than you'd expect. Lucian the Chance can make those threats. More often than not, it won't be too insane, but your opponent's going to want to kill it pretty quickly, and it's not a very easy thing to do. I think this card would probably be replaced by Garnag, the 4/5 Orc coming out in Fall of the Dark Brotherhood when that's released. Unfortunately, we don't have access to it quite yet, so obviously it's not in there. But I do think that's one thing you could play. If you really needed even more orcs, I decided against playing Stonetooth Scrapper, but it's definitely an option. I just didn't feel like it did enough for the deck, and I wanted to use the slots elsewhere for a little bit more late game that we'll get into in just a moment. So 3 Melton Chieftain, this is the reason you'd want to play orcs in Warrior specifically. The summon effect, draw a random orc from your discard pile, and other friendly orcs have +1/+1. So if essentially everything you're playing is going to be an orc, this is basically a Divine Fervor on a body, with the downside, of course, being if this card is destroyed, you lose the +1/+1. But this card punches, and it also refills your hand. So playing this card is one reason I didn't include Triumphant Jarl for the hand refill. I hoped Melton Chieftain could be able to pull enough weight in conjunction with the other late game we had, and from what I could tell, it did very well. I didn't really have any problems against slower decks because all of our things were threatening, and Melton Chieftain just helped us out that much more in the late game. So yeah, this card is very, very powerful, allowing you to get back occasionally, an additional Wood Orc Headhunter. If you can wait to play this card until you can get max value out of the +1/+1, or until you have better cards than a Greystone Ravager in your discard pile, just give yourself chances to get other Melton Chieftains, Wood Orc Headhunters, Gorge Fog, those kind of things. If you can get those back, or Bankai, those are really powerful things you'd want to reuse if you needed to. So 3 Wood Orc Headhunters, obviously not much to say about this. This is, a huge amount of reach added to the deck, just 5 damage coming out of nowhere. 5-drop, 5/4 with Breakthrough and Charge. It's essentially always going to have Charge. Later in the game, you might want to hold on to if you're just waiting for those extra points of damage against a control deck to finish the game. You might not want to play like the Firm Defender or something like an Orcland Captain. If you know it's just going to be blown up, you might want to hold it to make sure you can proc Charge on one of your Wood Orc Headhunters as soon as you draw it. If you have 7 Magicka, which you probably do if it's late in the game. But yeah, Wood Orc Headhunter on curve, it's great. Later in the game, if you're just trying to squeeze out those last points of damage, it's great. Really one of the reasons we play orcs in the first place. Then moving on to turn 6, we have more of the control punish cards. We're playing these because they're very hard to deal with. They add to the board and, give us an insurmountable amount of pressure. 2 Blackworm Necromancers. Even though it's nerfed, I felt it would be good in this deck because we really don't have anything weak to get back. So more often than not, if you're being ahead on life, this card is going to be very powerful for you. You can even get back really powerful cards like Wood Orc Headhunter, Melton Chieftain to get something else back from the discard pile, etc. And we have the Gorge Fog, which is basically the orc version of Blackworm Necromancer, but they kind of serve the same function, but obviously Gorge Fog pulls from your deck. It does have to wait a turn, though. Despite having to wait, not impacting the board immediately, this card is very difficult to deal with, especially if you've been hopefully doing what the deck is supposed to do by putting up threats leading up to that point. If your opponent's been using removal and they're falling farther and farther behind, Gorge Fog can sort of seal the deal there, and it can pull very powerful things again like the Wood Orc Headhunter for extra reach, Earthbone Spinner to get past guards, Belligerent Giant, which is our next thing to talk about, running 3 copies of these. I definitely wanted to include this in the deck, and I definitely recommend it to you all if you're going to try this deck. 3 Belligerent Giants put in a ton of work. This was sort of the nail in the coffin, another reason we didn't need Triumphant Jarl. We sort of had enough pressure on the board, and the Belligerent Giant, as soon as your opponent just tries to put something out there to trade, when you Belligerent Giant it back in conjunction with everything else you've played so far, it usually just sealed the game for me. Obviously, this is what I was talking about when I said we have other support removal, because Belligerent Giant can target supports, but that's really not going to be your concern. At least with the cards that are out so far, I didn't find myself ever targeting a support with Belligerent Giant. I was just bouncing guys for tempo or bouncing my opponent's guards and killing my opponent. And the last card, Nogleave, I mentioned that it's very rare to find an endurance deck that doesn't want to play this, and this deck is the rule, not the exception. This is just a big 7/7 that can help us race by plopping it down in the shadow lane against our opponent who is playing an aggressive deck, or against a slower deck. This is just our big beefy threat number 1,000,001 or something, because your opponent's just going to have a hard time dealing with this like they've had a hard time dealing with everything else. Versatile card, I thought it was worth including, another good thing to get off of the Gorge Fog or Black Worm or whatever you might have. So that's basically it for the deck and how it operates. Pretty aggressive, pretty powerful stuff. I did want to talk briefly about a couple of cards I'm not including that are sort of Orc synergy that you might think of including. I didn't think Hrothgar Kingpin was powerful enough. I thought it was more of a liability than anything else. It does die immediately to a lot of things if you can't play a bunch of Orcs. And in the version of Orcs that we're playing, more of a mid-range aggro deck, we're probably only going to be playing one creature usually per turn on any given turn. Occasionally it's going to be 2 creatures. Very rarely are we going to be able to really snowball this Kingpin, and it just starts at too low. If it was a 2/2, obviously I think it'd be nuts, but it's a 1/1, so dies to too many things in my opinion. And the other card we're not playing, just because of the tempo loss, is a 3-drop in Endurance, Chieftain's Banner. So the support friendly orcs have +0/+2. A few people ask me about this, and ironically a lot of the times that I've played against and lost orcs on the ladder, it's been somewhat related to Chieftain's Banner. A lot of times people would assemble just a couple things, or they'd assemble the banners first, and then when they'd play their tiny little Greystone Ravages or whatever, everything was out of range of me killing. I wanted a more proactive strategy. I didn't feel like the tempo loss of 3 Magicka was something I could warrant in the aggressive meta where I was playing this deck. Perhaps if the meta changes to be a lot of control decks only, you could maybe justify this card, but I still feel like there are better things to do. I'd rather include Bone Colossus or Triumphant Jarl or something. Banner is okay, but I didn't feel like my board was having any problems sticking to the board. My guys are having any problems sticking to the board without the banner, and definitely a pretty horrible top deck if you're just looking to add to the board. So I was happy with how the deck performed. Hopefully you guys give it a shot. If you're looking to play orcs, I would say this version is pretty powerful. 16-2. Obviously, it might be because of, like I said, getting a little bit lucky. What we were playing against. Maybe I played against a wide variety of decks, though. But yeah, I definitely encourage you if you're looking for an orc warrior deck. If you're really looking to play orcs and you didn't really know how to build it before, maybe start with this version. Let me know what you think. Hopefully you've enjoyed the deck tech. Feel free to leave a like if you have. Feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts on the deck, anything I might have left out, any suggestions, etc., comments if you've played it at all. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content, deck techs, stream highlights, other gameplay videos. Follow the stream at the link down below, and I will see you guys next time.